And in studying those occurrences, I've been able to put together a picture, along with other scientists who studied the same thing, a picture of bone modification, of the processing of human bone that's analogous to the processing of animal bone, that demonstrates to us that one of the things that happened here in the Southwest was cannibalism.
I think it's impossible to prove that cannibalism took place. What you can prove are the bones are in a certain condition. And without being able to tell exactly what the people did to produce bones in that sort of state, I don't really think it's wise to conclude that these people were cannibals. We really don't know what they were doing. And I think in this instance, despite the fact that Tim White was extremely careful in his analysis of the literature and his analysis of the artifacts, I think he was seduced by the notion of cannibalism. In that I think it was inevitable that he concluded that these people were cannibals. I think that's the case because there wouldn't be any news if he concluded that they were not cannibals. Bad news always makes the networks.
Archaeology is not about proof. Archaeological science is about inference. It's about how we use that static record, how we can interpret it, how we can infer from it activities that happened many centuries ago.
Men Ahrens tror att även de försiktigaste tolkningarna påverkas av de uråldriga föreställningarna om kannibalism.
Herodotus, the first reporter on the customs of other people, begins his account with the suggestion that peoples on the border of Western civilization were cannibals. What we have 3,000 or 2,500 years later is the same notion that people on the borders of our time and the people on the borders of our place were also cannibals. It's an idea that we cannot free ourselves of.
White håller ändå fast vid sin ståndpunkt att det har förekommit kannibalism i sydvästra Nordamerika. I mikroskop har han hittat oväntade märken i ändarna på mankorsbenen.
After these bones had been fractured for their marrow, there is still fat and grease in these bones. It's well known ethnographically that people exploit this by boiling the bones. And when these bone splinters with these very sharp ends are placed in a ceramic vessel, what we find is that the vessel walls, because of the temper, are almost like sandpaper. And when the bone, these sharp bone ends, are circulated around inside this vessel, they pick up a polishing. They're actually, if we could show it on the outside, they're picking up a beveling as they circulate around on the inside of this vessel. And this is unambiguous evidence that the bones themselves, after the fracture, were placed in a ceramic vessel, presumably to be exploited for their last remaining nutritional value, something we never see in mortuary practice.
Men det finns andra som inte är så säkra på att man kan utesluta begravningsritualer som förklaring.
Very often people bury the dead, leave them in the ground or above ground for weeks or for months, and then remove them, dig them up, remove the flesh, boil them, put them in pots, and then rebury the bones or keep the bones. This is going to look like cannibalism. It's always going to look like cannibalism, and it's never quite clear whether the people have been paying respect to the dead or eating their dead.
Peter Bullock vid New Mexico-museet i Santa Fe har specialiserat sig på Anasazi-arkeologi.
It's very possible that the defleshing and secondary burial of human remains, as is reported for Australian Aborigines, took place in the American Southwest.
White utesluter den möjligheten och hävdar att de australiska benens kondition skiljer sig markant från mankorsbenens.
In fact, we've made a very extensive study of secondary burial throughout the world. We've looked at this phenomenon in many different cultures. And the closest thing that we find to it is in the Australian Aboriginal case, where in some of the Australian Aboriginals, they practice primary burial, they re-excavate the skeleton, and then they take the bones and they break them into small pieces. The small pieces are then put into hollow log coffins that are erected as the final resting place of the dead. Even in those cases, however, we do not find the kind of evidence that we have here among the Anasazi for the processing of the bones for their nutritive value.
Kan krigföring förklara behandlingen av benen? Vi vet att slättindianerna ibland misshandlade och styckade liken efter striderna.
A perfect example of this are the human remains from the Battle of the Little Bighorn. The same range of trauma is present in the bones. The bones are defleshed, knife marks and cut marks are present. There's even Indian informants that talk about the range of mutilations that occurred on the victims after death. And yet, you know, there's no claim of cannibalism at the Battle of the Little Bighorn.
We think that this is not a very likely explanation for these assemblages. The reason being that these bones show signs that the meat was completely stripped away before they were broken. We see actual physical contact between the hammerstone and the anvil and the bone itself, which means the meat had to be gone. It wasn't there to cushion the blows. These bones were processed for the marrow inside. We have no instance in the annals of warfare in any culture where we find this kind of extreme fragmentation of the bones and a pattern fragmentation of the bones, such that the bones with the highest nutritive value are the most fragmented.
Å andra sidan framkastar Terry Nye teorin att krig kan ha lett fram till eller bidragit till kannibalism i ett mycket speciellt syfte.
If there was a great warrior that got killed in battle, I could see maybe that cannibalism would occur, that party would, you know, partake maybe in a ceremonial fashion, part of that person's flesh in order to acquire his strength and his powers.
Vad är det som har fängslat oss så med den här hanteringen? Som vi lär oss påpekar är kannibalism ofta en etikett på det exotiska eller okända som i regel saknar täckning.
They got off at the jungle's edge and glared at us. We had been among cannibals long enough to know that this meant...
We have to prove to ourselves that we've made advances in civilization. The only way we can prove to ourselves that we've made some sort of advances is to suggest that in the past we were somehow different. In the past, we ate each other. In the present, we don't do these sorts of things. And therefore, we have to be extremely careful of accusing other people of being cannibals, because we know what this means when we say it. It says we are better than them. And if we are better than them, maybe we have the right to rule them.
And imagine 1,000 years ago, just 1 year of drought, what it could do to a whole tribe or a whole group of people. Maybe it was an honor to be cooked and eaten then, so that the tribe can live.
Kan vi någonsin få reda på exakt vad som hände när det inte finns någon annan dokumentation än benrester?
When it comes to the realm of explaining exactly what happened there, who were the people who did this, who left this refuse on the floor, this is something that right now, as an archaeologist and as a physical anthropologist, I can't explain. All I can do is to say to you, this indicates that cannibalism occurred around 1100 AD in the Mancos Canyon.
To me, as a Native American, it really doesn't matter one way or another. Maybe it did happen, or, you know, it didn't. You know, it happens everywhere else. Why not in Anasazi?
I don't think we can prove that the Anasazi were cannibals. So I think we should leave the subject alone and concentrate possibly on something more positive in the history of Native Americans than the possibility that they're actually eating each other.
Myterna och historierna om kannibalism har följt oss från tidernas begynnelse.